Mother Bear adopted the lost human baby of Chief Marshal. What happened put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The forest stirred with the first light of dawn, dewdrops glistening on emerald leaves as birds began their morning songs. But beneath this peaceful awakening, something unusual disturbed the woodland's natural rhythm. A soft whimper echoed through the trees, so faint it could have been mistaken for the wind. The sound grew into a fragile cry, a human cry that drifted through the misty air, carrying with it a sense of desperate loneliness. Nestled on a bed of moss beneath an ancient oak tree lay a small bundle wrapped in woven cloth adorned with intricate tribal patterns. The infant, no more than 6 months old, was the beloved child of Chief Aldrich Marshal, leader of the Silver Pine village that bordered the vast forest. How the baby had come to be separated from his people remained a mystery, perhaps carried away by a sudden flood from last night's storm, or left temporarily during a gathering expedition gone wrong. The child's tiny hands reached upward, fingers grasping at nothing but cool morning air, tears streaming down flushed cheeks. Not far from where the infant lay, Nura, a gentle female bear with russet fur that caught the sunlight like burnished copper, raised her head. Her keen ears twitched at the unfamiliar sound. With 2 cubs of her own sleeping peacefully in their den, the mother bear recognized the distress call of a young one. She rose to her full height, sniffing the air cautiously. Something about that cry pulled at her, awakening an instinct deeper than fear or territorial defense. Nura moved through the forest with surprising grace for her size, following the sound until she came upon the human child. She approached slowly, her massive paws making almost no sound on the forest floor. The baby's cries subsided momentarily as dark, intelligent eyes met the bear's gaze. Any other predator might have seen the infant as prey, but Nura sensed only vulnerability, a lost cub of another kind. She lowered her great head, nostrils flaring as she sniffed the bundle carefully. The baby, too young to understand danger, reached out with curious fingers and touched the bear's moist nose. A connection formed in that moment. Something inexplicable, yet powerful. The infant's fingers curled into the thick fur of Nura's snout, and a soft, wondering sound escaped its lips. Nura made a decision that defied the natural order. With extreme gentleness, she carefully took the edge of the woven blanket between her teeth and lifted the baby from the moss. The infant remained surprisingly calm, as if understanding that this enormous creature meant no harm. Nura carried the human child back through the forest, moving with deliberate care over fallen logs and around thorny undergrowth, until she reached the hollowed-out cave beneath ancient tree roots that served as her den. Inside, her 2 cubs stirred at her return, their small bodies rolling toward their mother with expectant mewls for milk and warmth. Nura gently placed the human baby beside them. The infant's eyes widened at the sight of the cubs, a tiny hand reaching out to touch their soft fur. Instead of rejecting the strange newcomer, Nura's cubs nuzzled against the human child, their body heat offering comfort against the morning chill. Nura settled beside the unlikely trio, her large body creating a protective barrier between them and the outside world. As the human infant nestled against her warm fur alongside the bear cubs, something remarkable happened. The baby stopped crying completely, soothed by the deep, rhythmic rumble of Nura's breathing and the comforting presence of her cubs. The mother bear gently licked the infant's face, cleaning away tears with the same tenderness she showed her own young. Back at Silver Pine Village, the morning's peaceful routine shattered with a mother's desperate scream. Ilara Marshal, wife of Chief Aldrich, had discovered her baby's empty cradleboard. The intricate wooden carrier that normally held their precious child lay tipped on its side, the blankets disturbed as though by rushing water from the previous night's storm. Her anguished cry brought villagers running from their morning tasks, faces etched with concern. "My child is gone. My baby is gone." Ilara collapsed to her knees, her body shaking with sobs as her husband rushed to her side, his face a mask of disbelief and growing horror. Chief Aldrich's strong voice, usually commanding and assured, trembled as he called to his people. "The river must have risen in the night and taken our child. Search parties, form now. We must find my son before it's too late." The village erupted into organized chaos as hunters, gatherers, and warriors divided into groups, each taking a different direction into the forest. Women prepared medicine bundles and warm blankets for when the baby would be found. Children were kept close as parents suddenly faced their deepest fear, that the forest, which provided their livelihood, could also take away what they held most precious. As the search parties ventured deeper into the woods, none could have imagined that the lost heir of their tribe now slept peacefully in a bear's den, cradled by a mother whose heart had recognized need beyond the boundaries of species. And as the human rescuers moved farther from where the infant actually lay, the bond between Noura and her adopted human cub grew stronger with each passing hour, a connection that would eventually bring an entire village to tears. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting dappled light through the forest canopy. Inside the den, the human baby, a boy the village had named Lumil, meaning blessed light, awoke from his slumber. His tiny fingers instinctively reached for the warmth of Noura's fur, grasping it with surprising strength. Unlike the previous night when he had cried for his mother's familiar touch, Lumil now gazed with wonder at his new surroundings, his bright eyes taking in the dim, earthy confines of the bear's home. Noura's cubs, Koda and Mira, had already awakened and were playfully wrestling near the entrance of the den. They paused occasionally to check on their new den mate, curious about this hairless cub that smelled so different from anything they had encountered before. The larger cub, Koda, approached Lumil cautiously, sniffing at his face before giving him a gentle lick that caused the baby to burst into delighted giggles. The sound echoed through the den, a human sound in a wild place. Yet it seemed to fit perfectly into this strange new family. As morning turned to midday, Noura faced her first challenge as adoptive mother to a human infant. Her cubs would soon be hungry, and while she could nurse them, the human child needed different sustenance. With a soft grunt, she nudged her cubs closer to Lumil, as if instructing them to keep watch. Then, with one last lingering look at her unlikely family, Noura slipped out of the den to forage. The forest around them teemed with life, birds calling from the treetops, insects humming in the underbrush, and occasionally the snap of a twig as larger animals moved through the woods. While Noura was gone, an unexpected visitor approached the den. Oren, an old wolf with silver-flecked fur, who had once been the alpha of his pack before age forced him into solitude. His keen nose had detected the unusual scent of human mixed with bear, a combination that piqued his curiosity enough to override his natural caution. Oren peered into the shadowy entrance of the den, his amber eyes reflecting what little light penetrated the darkness. What he saw made the old wolf freeze in confusion. 2 bear cubs and a human infant, huddled together in a pile of warmth and innocence. The baby noticed the wolf first, turning his head toward the entrance with wide, fearless eyes. Instead of crying, Lumil reached out a tiny hand toward the predator, as if extending a greeting. For a long moment the old wolf simply stared, memories of his own lost pack stirring something deep within him. Then, with a soft whine that seemed almost mournful, Orin backed away from the den. He would not harm these cubs, any of them. Instead, he settled himself a short distance away, his posture alert and watchful. Perhaps it was instinct, or perhaps it was loneliness, but the old wolf had appointed himself guardian in the mother bear's absence. Meanwhile, deep in another part of the forest, Chief Aldrich led his band of trackers with grim determination. His face, normally proud and serene, now bore the haggard look of a man whose world had been shattered. Beside him walked his closest friend and the tribe's most skilled hunter, Thorn, whose eyes constantly scanned the ground for any sign of disturbance. Broken twigs, displaced leaves, anything that might lead them to the missing child. "We should have reached the river by now," Thorn said quietly, his voice tight with concern. "If the waters carried him this way." Chief Aldrich didn't allow him to finish the thought. "My son lives," he said firmly, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his fear. "I would feel it if he were gone from this world. A father knows." What neither man realized was that they were tracking in the wrong direction. The storm had indeed caused a small flood, but it had carried Lumil's cradleboard southeast, not northwest, as they now searched. With each step, they moved farther from where Nura had found the baby, the distance between father and son growing with every passing hour. Back at the village, Ilara Marshal sat rigid with grief outside their dwelling, surrounded by the women of the tribe who offered comfort she could not feel. Her hands worked mechanically at weaving a small protective charm, a mother's desperate attempt to reach across the distance and shield her child from harm. Her fingers, usually so nimble and sure, fumbled with the sacred threads as tears blurred her vision. "He will return," whispered Kira, the elderly medicine woman whose wizened face had witnessed 3 generations of the tribe's joys and sorrows. "The spirits of the forest do not take without purpose." Ilara's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with sudden anger. What purpose could there be in taking a helpless infant? What lesson am I to learn from this cruelty? Kira did not flinch from the young mother's rage. Instead, she took Ilara's trembling hands in her own gnarled ones. "Not all that appears cruel is meant as punishment, child. Sometimes, what seems like the greatest tragedy becomes the bridge to understanding we never knew we needed." Her cryptic words offered little comfort to Ilara, who pulled her hands away and returned to her weaving with renewed intensity. Yet something in the old woman's calm certainty planted a seed of hope, fragile but persistent, in the soil of her despair. As the afternoon waned, Nura returned to her den with her jaws carefully carrying a bounty of forest treasures, the ripest berries she could find, tender roots rich with nutrients, and even a honeycomb dripping with golden sweetness. The sight that greeted her was unexpected, her cubs and the human child sleeping peacefully under the watchful eye of an old wolf who rose to his feet as she approached. For a tense moment, the 2 predators regarded each other, centuries of instinctual rivalry hanging in the air between them. Nura's lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth that could easily crush bone, while Orin's posture remained submissive yet dignified. Then, in a gesture that defied the natural order, the wolf lowered his muzzle and stepped back, yielding the space to the mother bear. With one last glance at the sleeping infants, Orin slipped away into the forest, his silver-flecked form disappearing among the shadows. Nura entered the den and gently nudged her cubs awake. Koda and Mira immediately pounced on the honeycomb, their muzzles quickly becoming sticky with sweetness. The human child, however, required more care. Using her surprisingly dexterous paws, Nura mashed some of the berries against a smooth stone, creating a pulp that she then carefully offered to Lumil. The baby, driven by hunger, eagerly sucked the nourishment from Noura's fur, his small hands grasping at her muzzle with complete trust. As twilight descended upon the forest, painting the trees in hues of purple and gold, a strange harmony had settled over the unlikely family in the den. Outside, however, the search for the missing child grew more desperate as daylight faded. Chief Aldrich had reluctantly agreed to return to the village for the night, knowing that searching in darkness would only endanger more lives. The look of accusation in Alara's eyes as he returned empty-handed cut him more deeply than any weapon could have. That night, as the village mourned and prayed around a solemn fire, something remarkable happened in the bear's den. Lumil, who had never before slept through an entire night without waking his parents for comfort or feeding, slumbered peacefully nestled between Noura's paws, as if he had found exactly where he belonged. The mother bear kept vigil throughout the night, her senses alert to any danger that might threaten her expanded family, while her own cubs pressed close against the human child, sharing their warmth and acceptance without reservation. And in the village, Chief Aldrich stared into the flames of the council fire, unaware that his son was being cared for by one whom his people had long considered an enemy to be feared. The irony would soon become clear, for the forest had not taken his child out of cruelty, but perhaps, as Kira had suggested, to build a bridge of understanding that would forever change the relationship between the human tribe and the creatures with whom they shared the ancient woods. The next morning broke with a crimson sky, a searingly beautiful backdrop to the village's renewed determination. Chief Aldrich had barely slept, his mind filled with images of his son alone and afraid in the vast forest. He gathered the search parties before dawn, his voice hoarse but firm as he addressed them. "Today, we change our approach," he announced, pointing to the eastern ridges. "We will fan out in all directions from where the cradle board was found. No stone unturned, no hollow unexplored." His eyes, bloodshot from sleeplessness, swept over his people. "My son is out there, and today we bring him home." What Chief Aldrich couldn't know was that at that very moment, his son was experiencing his first morning ritual with his bear family. Noura had led her cubs, all three of them, to a small, sunlit clearing, where a crystal-clear stream bubbled over smooth rocks. The bear cubs plunged into the water with abandon, splashing and playing while their mother carefully lowered the human child to the stream's edge. Lumil squealed with delight as his bare feet touched the cool water. Noura watched attentively as the baby patted the surface, creating tiny splashes that made him giggle with joy. She then gently used her tongue to clean his face and hands, just as she would groom her own cubs. The intimacy of this moment, a wild bear tenderly caring for a human child, stood in stark contrast to the fear and hostility that had long characterized the relationship between the two species. Not far from this peaceful scene, a lone hunter named Rowan moved silently through the underbrush. Unlike the larger search parties that crashed through the forest with urgent calls, Rowan believed in the power of quiet observation. A young man who had always felt more at home among trees than people, he had volunteered to search independently, trusting his intimate knowledge of the forest's rhythms and inhabitants. Rowan paused as he heard the unusual sound of splashing accompanied by what could only be a child's laughter. Drawing his bow instinctively, he crept toward the sound, pushing aside branches with extreme care to avoid detection. What he saw through the leaves made him doubt his own eyes. A mother bear bathing a human infant, the child clearly unharmed and even seeming to enjoy the attention. His first instinct was to nock an arrow, to save the chief's son from what surely must be imminent danger, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the obvious care with which the bear handled the child, or the baby's clear contentment, or the way the bear cubs included the human in their play as if he were one of their own. Whatever the reason, Rowan lowered his bow and simply watched, his understanding of the natural world fundamentally shifting before his eyes. For nearly an hour he observed the unlikely family, noting how the mother bear seemed to have adapted her behavior to accommodate the fragile human child, how she gathered the softest mosses for him to sit upon, how she kept her powerful paws gentle when touching him, how she seemed to understand his needs even before he expressed them. It was as if she had accessed some universal language of motherhood that transcended the boundaries between species. When the bear finally gathered her cubs, including the human one, and began to move back toward what Rowan presumed was their den, he made his decision. Instead of immediately rushing back to the village with news that would be met with disbelief and likely violence toward the bear, he would follow them, observe further, and determine the best course of action to ensure both the child's safety and the recognition of the miracle he was witnessing. As Nora and her unlikely family disappeared into the denser part of the forest, Rowan followed at a distance, his heart pounding with the weight of the secret he now carried. He was seeing something that would challenge everything his people believed about the separation between human and animal, between civilization and wilderness. This was not a story of tragedy, as everyone in the village assumed, but one of unexpected compassion and connection, a story with the power to heal ancient wounds of fear and misunderstanding. But first, he needed to be certain, to understand more deeply before bringing such revolutionary news back to his chief. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, Chief Aldrich's search party had found something, a small piece of the woven blanket that had wrapped Lumo, caught on a bramble near where a stream joined the larger river. This discovery sent a surge of renewed hope through the searchers, even as it led them even farther from where their chief's son actually rested, in the protective embrace of a mother bear's care. The irony of the situation was not lost on the forest itself, which seemed to hold its breath as human and animal paths crossed and diverged, all centered around one small child, whose innocent presence was about to challenge the deepest assumptions of his people. For in the heart of the wilderness, an ancient truth was being revealed, that compassion knows no species, that care can transcend the boundaries humans create to separate themselves from the natural world, and that sometimes what appears to be a tragedy may in fact be the beginning of a transformation none could have imagined. As Rowan continued to shadow Nora and her unusual family, the skies darkened unexpectedly. What had begun as a clear day was quickly giving way to ominous storm clouds gathering above the forest canopy. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Rowan recognized the signs of a dangerous storm approaching, the same kind of sudden tempest that had likely separated the child from his parents in the first place. Nora sensed the changing weather, too. Her pace quickened as she herded her cubs toward their den, her massive body shielding the human child from branches that whipped in the increasingly violent wind. Lumo, seeming to understand the urgency, clung tightly to her fur without protest. The bear cubs bounded ahead, instinctively seeking the safety of their home, as the first heavy raindrops began to pelt through the leaves. Rowan lost sight of them momentarily as the rain intensified, becoming a blinding sheet that obscured his vision. By the time he regained his bearings, the bear family had disappeared into the densest part of the forest. Lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. Rowan knew he needed to find shelter quickly. The storm had become too dangerous to continue tracking. He spotted a hollowed-out oak nearby and ducked inside just as hail began to pound the forest floor. From his temporary refuge, he peered out at the chaos of the storm, concern for the bear and her human charge gnawing at him. Had they made it safely to their den? Was the human child protected from this fury? What Rowan couldn't see was that Nura and her family had indeed reached their den, but not without difficulty. A massive lightning strike had toppled a tree directly in their path, forcing the mother bear to make a desperate detour through unfamiliar territory. This route took them dangerously close to a steep ravine that the recent rains had made treacherously slippery. As they navigated the treacherous edge, the ground beneath one of Nura's paws suddenly gave way. The mother bear lurched sideways, her powerful muscles straining to maintain balance. In that heart-stopping moment, she made an instinctive choice. She tossed Lumo from her jaws toward the safety of solid ground where her cubs stood watching in alarm. The human child landed safely in a patch of soft moss, but the momentum of the throw sent Nura sliding further toward the edge of the ravine. Koda and Mira whimpered in distress as they watched their mother struggle, her claws digging desperately into the mud. With a tremendous effort, Nura managed to pull herself back from the brink, her massive body heaving with exertion. She lay panting on the ground for several moments, her dark eyes fixed on the human child who now crawled toward her with determination, seemingly unaware of how close they had come to disaster. This near tragedy created a shift in Nura's behavior. When she finally rose to her feet, she picked up Lumil with even greater care than before, a new protectiveness evident in every movement. The experience had awakened something profound in her, not just the instinct to protect a vulnerable cub, but a deeper understanding of how precious and fragile this human life had become to her. They finally reached the den as the storm reached its full fury, the wind howling like a wounded animal outside their sanctuary. Inside, Nura curled her body around all three cubs, creating a living fortress against the storm's rage. Lumil nestled between her front paws, his small hands patting her muzzle in what almost seemed like gratitude or reassurance. The bear cubs pressed close to their adopted brother, their combined warmth creating an island of comfort amidst the tempest. Meanwhile, the storm had forced Chief Aldrich and his search party to seek refuge in a series of caves along the riverbank. The chief stood at the entrance, his tall figure silhouetted against the lightning flashes as he stared out at the deluge with anguish etched into every line of his face. His second-in-command, Thorn, approached cautiously, placing a hand on his leader's shoulder. "We will find him, Aldrich," Thorn said, his voice barely audible above the storm. "This is but a delay, not an end to our search. What if he's out there in this?" Chief Aldrich's voice broke as he gestured toward the violent weather. "A child so small, so helpless." "Your son is strong like his father," Thorn replied firmly, "and the spirits of our ancestors watch over him." What neither man could have anticipated was that at that exact moment, another search party, one that had ventured far to the east under the leadership of Ilara herself, was making a discovery that would change everything. Against all counsel, Ilara had refused to remain in the village another day. "I cannot sit idle while my child needs me," she had declared, her grief transformed into fierce determination. With 5 of the tribe's most experienced trackers, she had set out at dawn, following a different path, one guided not by logic but by a mother's intuition. Now, huddled beneath an outcropping of rock as the storm raged around them, Ilara's group had found something significant. A small clearing where the ground had been disturbed in a pattern that the eldest tracker, Soren, recognized immediately. "Bear," he said simply, crouching to examine the massive paw prints more closely. A female, by the size of it, and she wasn't alone. His weathered fingers traced smaller impressions in the mud. "Cubs, 2 of them." Ilara felt her heart constrict with terror at the implication, but Soren wasn't finished. He moved a few paces away and pointed to another impression in the soft earth, one that made Ilara's knees buckle beneath her. "A child," Soren said, his voice hushed with disbelief. A human child sat here. He pointed to tiny handprints in the mud, then to a small depression where a baby might have been placed. And the bear. He followed the tracks with his eyes, his brow furrowing in confusion. The bear didn't attack. She carried it away. Carried it away to kill it elsewhere, one of the younger trackers suggested grimly, but Soren shook his head. No, the old man said firmly. Look at the pattern here. No signs of aggression, no blood, no struggle. He straightened up, his eyes meeting Alara's with wonder. I have tracked bear for 60 seasons, and never have I seen anything like this. This bear carried your child as she would carry her own cub. Alara couldn't speak, her mind spinning with conflicting emotions. Hope that her child might still live, terror at the thought of him in a predator's jaws, and confusion at Soren's assessment. Before she could find her voice, another tracker called out from a few yards away. Here, the tracks continue this way. He pointed toward a dense thicket of pine and oak. They head deeper into the old forest. Then so do we, Alara said, taking a step forward before Soren's hand on her arm stopped her. The storm, my lady, he cautioned. It's too dangerous now. We must wait. Would the bear wait? Alara challenged, her eyes flashing. Would she abandon her cubs because of rain and wind? I think not. She pulled free of his grasp, and neither shall I abandon mine. In that moment, Alara's understanding of motherhood expanded beyond the boundaries of her human experience. Without realizing it, she had drawn a parallel between herself and the bear that supposedly held her child, recognizing a common devotion that transcended species. This intuitive connection would prove more significant than anyone could yet imagine. As Alara's group reluctantly followed her into the storm, Rowan was making his own momentous decision. The tempest had finally begun to subside, leaving behind a forest transformed. Branches torn from trees, new streams cutting through what had been solid ground, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and broken vegetation. He emerged from his shelter, determined to locate the bear's den before either of the search parties could. Rowan understood what was at stake. If Chief Aldrich's warriors found the bear first, they would attack without hesitation, seeing only a threat to be eliminated and a child to be rescued. What Rowan had witnessed, however, told a different story, one of nurturing rather than danger, of connection rather than conflict. He needed to reach Nura first, to somehow protect both her and the human child from the violence that would inevitably follow a misunderstanding of what was truly happening. The young hunter moved with renewed purpose, following the faint tracks that remained after the rain had washed away most signs of passage. His intimate knowledge of the forest's secrets allowed him to notice what others might miss. A tuft of russet fur caught on a thorny bush, the subtle pattern of bent grass where heavy paws had recently passed. These subtle clues led him ever deeper into the heart of the old forest, to places few from the village ever ventured. As dusk approached once more, casting long shadows through the rain-cleaned forest, Rowan finally found what he sought. A massive tangle of roots from an ancient fallen oak created a natural cave, and the soft sounds emanating from within confirmed his suspicions. This was Nura's den. He approached with extreme caution, aware that a mother bear with cubs would be at her most dangerous if she felt threatened. Concealing himself behind a nearby boulder, Rowan watched as Nura emerged from the den, stretching her powerful body in the fading light. Behind her, to Rowan's amazement, came not only her 2 bear cubs, but also the human child, crawling with surprising speed as if eager to explore the freshly washed world outside. What happened next made Rowan's breath catch in his throat. The baby, spotting a colorful butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower, began to crawl toward it with determined focus. The edge of the clearing, however, dropped off sharply, a dangerous fall for a small child. Before Rowan could even think to intervene, Nora moved with astonishing speed, placing herself between the baby and the drop-off. With gentle precision, she used her muzzle to nudge Lumil back toward safer ground. The human child looked up at the bear, not with fear, but with a kind of understanding that seemed impossible for one so young. He patted her nose affectionately before turning his attention to the bear cubs, who had begun a playful wrestling match nearby. To Rowan's further astonishment, the baby crawled directly into the midst of their play, and the cubs immediately adjusted their behavior, their swipes becoming gentler, their nips turning to soft nuzzles when they interacted with their human brother. Rowan remained frozen in his hiding place, witnessing a harmony that defied everything he had been taught about the separation between the human and animal worlds. This was not merely a case of unusual adoption. It was a demonstration of understanding and communion across the boundaries of species, a glimpse of what might be possible if humans could see beyond their fear and preconceptions. His silent observation was interrupted by the faint sound of voices, human voices, approaching from the east. Ilara's search party had tracked the bear far more effectively than Rowan had anticipated, likely guided by Soren's legendary skills. They would arrive within minutes, and Rowan had to make a choice that would determine the fate of this extraordinary family. Without further hesitation, he stepped from his hiding place, making his presence known to Nora. The bear immediately tensed, rising to her full height with a low warning growl. The cubs, sensing danger, scurried back toward the den, but remarkably, the human child remained where he was, looking curiously from the bear to the man who now stood with empty hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," Rowan said softly, knowing the bear couldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone might convey his intentions. "But others are coming who may not see what I have seen." Nora's growl deepened, her massive head swinging toward the direction of the approaching voices. She seemed to understand the threat instantly, moving to stand protectively over Lumil, who still showed no fear, either of the bear or of Rowan. In that critical moment, Rowan made a decision that would forever alter the relationship between his people and the creatures of the forest. Instead of attempting to snatch the child, instead of reaching for the knife at his belt, he slowly lowered himself to a sitting position on the forest floor. With deliberate movements, he removed his weapons, bow, quiver, and knife, and placed them on the ground beside him. Then, in a voice meant to carry to the approaching search party, he called out, "I am Rowan of Silverpine. I have found the chief's son alive and well. Approach slowly and without weapons, or you risk everything." His words echoed through the trees, bringing the approaching group to an abrupt halt. After a moment of confused silence, a woman's voice responded, strained with emotion yet commanding. "This is Ilara, mother of the lost child and wife of Chief Aldrich. What do you mean, risk everything? If my son is there, bring him to me at once." Rowan took a deep breath, acutely aware of Nora's eyes upon him, of the trust he was about to either honor or betray. "I cannot," he replied. "You must come and see for yourself, but you must come in peace. Your son is under the protection of another mother, one who will defend him with her life if threatened." A murmur of confused voices followed this declaration. Then Ilara spoke again, closer now, though still unseen through the thick foliage. "I come alone and unarmed," she announced, her voice breaking slightly. "The others will wait." Despite protests from her companions, Ilara emerged from the trees moments later, her simple deerskin dress soaked from the storm, her dark hair falling in wet ropes around a face drawn with exhaustion and hope. She froze when she saw the tableau before her, a young hunter sitting peacefully on the ground, a massive bear standing protectively over a small, familiar form that made her heart leap into her throat. "Lumil," she whispered, taking an instinctive step forward before Rowan's raised hand stopped her. "Slowly," he cautioned. "She has been his guardian and protector. She has fed him, kept him warm, saved him from harm. She deserves your respect, not your fear." Alara's eyes never left her child as she processed Rowan's words. The baby had noticed her now, his face lighting up with recognition. He made a happy gurgling sound that seemed to reassure Nura, whose aggressive posture relaxed slightly, though she remained watchful. "What are you asking of me?" Ilara asked, her voice barely audible. "Approach as you would approach a wise elder of our tribe," Rowan suggested, "with reverence for what she has done. Kneel before her as you would kneel before the sacred fire. Show her that you understand the gift she has given you by keeping your son alive when all odds were against him." Time seemed to stand still in the clearing as Alara considered this unprecedented request. Everything she had been taught about bears, about their ferocity, their mindless aggression toward humans, warred with the evidence before her eyes. Her son, alive and apparently unharmed, sat beneath the very creature she had been raised to fear above all others in the forest. With tears streaming down her face, Ilara slowly lowered herself to her knees. Then, in a gesture that none of her people had ever made toward a wild creature, she bowed her head in a posture of profound gratitude. When she looked up again, her eyes met those of the bear, dark, intelligent eyes that held neither malice nor fear, but a wordless understanding that transcended the ancient barriers between their kinds. "Thank you," Ilara said simply, the words inadequate to express the depth of her emotion, but offered with complete sincerity. "Thank you for saving my son." What happened next would become legend among the Silver Pine people for generations to come. Nura, the mother bear who had defied the natural order to care for a human child, gently nudged Lumil with her nose. The baby giggled, reaching up to pat her muzzle one last time before turning and crawling, with more speed and confidence than he had shown before his time in the forest, toward his human mother. Ilara remained kneeling, frozen in disbelief as her son made his way to her without fear or hesitation. When he finally reached her, his small hands grasping at her familiar clothing, she gathered him into her arms with a sob that contained all the grief, fear, and now overwhelming joy of the past days. Nura watched this reunion without aggression, her cubs peering curiously from the safety of the den entrance. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the mother bear made a soft, chuffing sound to her cubs and began to back away, as if understanding that her role in this strange chapter had reached its conclusion. But Lumil, hearing the bear's vocalizations, squirmed in his mother's arms, turning to look back at his forest family. He made a distressed sound unlike anything Alara had heard from him before, a sound that seemed to contain longing and farewell. In response, Nura paused, her massive head tilting slightly as if considering something profound. Then, to the astonishment of both humans, the mother bear approached once more. Ilara held her breath, clutching her son protectively yet making no move to flee. Nura stopped just a few feet away and gently pushed one of her cubs forward with her nose. The small bear hesitantly approached, its innocent curiosity overcoming its natural caution. In a moment that sealed the miracle they were experiencing, Lumil reached out from his mother's arms, his tiny fingers just managing to touch the cub's fur. The two young ones, one human, one bear, regarded each other with a simple acceptance that made the adults around them seem suddenly burdened by unnecessary fears and divisions. "They know no hatred," Rowan said quietly. "They have not yet learned to fear what is different." Ilara looked from her son to the bear cubs, then to their powerful mother, who could have ended Lumil's life with a single swipe of her paw, but had instead preserved it with unexpected gentleness. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in her understanding of the world. A realization that perhaps the boundaries between human and animal were not as absolute as her people had always believed. "We have much to learn," she whispered, not just to Rowan, but to Nura as well, as if the bear might somehow comprehend the transformation taking place in her human heart. And much to change. The sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of the rest of Ilara's search party, led by the elderly tracker Soren. The old man stopped abruptly at the edge of the clearing, his weathered face registering shock at the scene before him. His chief's wife and child in peaceful proximity to an adult bear and her cubs. "Stay back," Ilara commanded, without taking her eyes from Nura, "and tell the others what you see here. Tell them that a bear has done what we might not have done for her cubs, cared for a child not her own, with no thought of tribe or kind or difference." Soren, who had lived long enough to know that the world still held wonders beyond human understanding, nodded slowly. "I will tell them," he promised, "though many will not believe." "Then they must come and see for themselves," Rowan interjected, rising carefully to his feet. "All of them, including Chief Aldrich, for this changes everything." As if understanding that a new pact was being formed, Nura gathered her cubs with a gentle nudge and led them back toward their den. At the entrance, she paused for one final look at the human child, who had, however briefly, been part of her family. Lumil waved a tiny hand in farewell, a gesture so human yet somehow perfectly understood in this moment of cross-species communion. The bear and her cubs disappeared into the shadows of their home, leaving the humans to begin the long journey back to their village. A journey that would carry with it the seeds of a profound change in how they related to the forest and its inhabitants. Word of the miracle spread quickly through the search parties scattered throughout the forest. By nightfall, as torches were lit to guide their way home, the story had grown with each retelling. A mother bear who had saved the chief's son, who had fed and protected him when all seemed lost, who had then willingly returned him to his people without violence or struggle. When Chief Aldrich finally held his son in his arms again, his face wet with tears of joy and relief, he listened in wonder to the accounts of those who had witnessed the extraordinary exchange. His wife, traditionally soft-spoken in tribal councils, now spoke with the authority of one who had glimpsed a deeper truth. "The bear could have killed our son," Ilara told her husband and the gathered elders that night around the council fire. "Instead, she saved him, fed him, taught him, returned him to us unharmed." Her eyes reflected the dancing flames as she continued. "What does this tell us about what we think we know of the creatures with whom we share these woods?" A profound silence followed her question, a silence filled with the crumbling of old certainties and the tentative emergence of new possibilities. It was Kira, the medicine woman, who finally spoke, her ancient voice carrying the weight of wisdom. "Since time beyond memory, we have seen ourselves as separate from the beasts of forest and field," she said slowly. "We have believed that the spirits blessed humans alone with understanding, with compassion, with the ability to rise above mere instinct." Her gnarled hands gestured toward the sleeping child in Ilara's arms. "Perhaps this child was taken not by accident but by design, to show us the error in our thinking." Chief Aldrich, known for his pride and traditional ways, might once have dismissed such talk. But the return of his son through means no one could have predicted had humbled him in ways nothing else could have. He rose to his feet, his imposing figure silhouetted against the flames. "Tomorrow," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the gathered tribe, "I will go to see this bear who saved my son. Not with weapons, but with gifts, not with fear, but with gratitude." He looked around at the shocked faces of his people. "And any who wish to understand this miracle may accompany me." And so it was that the following morning, as mist still clung to the forest floor, Chief Aldrich led a solemn procession into the woods. Rowan walked at his side, guiding them toward Nura's den with Alara following close behind, Lumo secure in her arms. Behind them came not warriors with spears and bows, but elders carrying bundles of the tribe's finest smoked meats, women with baskets of berries and nuts, and children with garlands of flowers and herbs. When they reached the clearing before Nura's den, the villagers arranged their gifts in a semicircle and then retreated to a respectful distance. Chief Aldrich stepped forward alone, carrying only a single token, a polished stone pendant on a leather cord, the symbol of his office and lineage. With ceremonial dignity, he placed it atop the pile of offerings. "Mother of the forest," he called out, using the formal address traditionally reserved for the most revered tribal ancestors, "who sheltered my son when he was lost to us, we come in peace and gratitude. We come to honor what you have taught us." For several tense moments nothing happened. The forest held its breath, birds and insects falling silent as if awaiting the response to this unprecedented human gesture. Then, slowly, Nura emerged from her den. Her cubs followed cautiously, staying close to her massive form as she surveyed the gathered humans and the bounty they had brought. From Ilara's arms, Lumo made a sound of recognition and delight, reaching toward his former guardian with unmistakable affection. This seemed to decide something for Nura. With deliberate movements, she approached the offerings, sniffing them carefully before taking a single berry in her mouth with surprising delicacy. A collective gasp rose from the villagers as they witnessed this acceptance. Chief Aldrich, overcome with emotion, did what none of his ancestors would have dreamed possible. He knelt before the bear, head bowed in a gesture of profound respect. "From this day forward," he declared, his voice carrying through the hushed forest, "no hunter of our tribe shall raise a weapon against the bears of this forest. They shall be honored as teachers and protectors, not feared as enemies." As if sealing this covenant, Nura rose briefly to her hind legs, not in threat but in acknowledgement. Standing thus, she seemed almost human in her bearing, a bridge between worlds that had too long been separated by misunderstanding and fear. When she returned to all fours and gathered her cubs to return to the safety of their den, something had fundamentally changed in the relationship between the human tribe and the forest they called home. A boundary had been crossed, a new understanding born from an act of unexpected compassion. In the seasons that followed, the people of Silver Pine developed a new way of living in harmony with the forest and its creatures. They told and retold the story of Nura and Lumil, the bear who adopted a human child, and in doing so, taught humans to see beyond their preconceptions, to recognize the capacity for nurturing and protection that existed in a creature they had once feared as a mindless predator. Lumil himself grew into a remarkable young man, gifted with an unusual ability to sense the needs and intentions of animals. As the future chief of his people, he would one day establish new traditions of stewardship and respect for all living things, guided by memories that lay too deep for conscious recall, but that shaped his heart nonetheless. Memories of a time when he had been cradled in the gentle paws of a mother bear, who had seen not an enemy, but a child in need. And in the secret places of the forest, where ancient trees whispered tales of all they had witnessed through countless human generations, The story of the bear and the chief's son became part of the very soil and air, a reminder that compassion can transcend the boundaries we create, that understanding can bloom in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes what appears to be a tragedy may in fact be the beginning of a bridge between worlds that should never have been separated. 20 summers passed since that remarkable day. The village of Silverpine had flourished under Chief Aldrich's new vision of harmony with the forest and its creatures. Hunting continued, but with newfound reverence, prayers of gratitude offered before each life was taken, no more than what was needed, every part of the animal used with respect. The bears of the forest, once feared and hunted without mercy, now moved through their territory unmolested, sometimes even visible at the edges of clearings where humans gathered berries or medicinal herbs. Lumo had grown into a strong young man of 21 winters, his broad shoulders and keen eyes reminiscent of his father, though there remained something different about him, something that villagers spoke of in hushed, wondering tones. The way animals responded to his presence, the ease with which he moved through the densest parts of the forest, his unusual ability to sense coming storms or the movements of distant herds. These gifts were attributed to his time with Nura, when his infant mind had absorbed lessons no human child had ever been taught before. On the eve of the summer solstice, as the village prepared for the ceremony that would officially name Lumiel as successor to his aging father, the young man slipped away from the festivities. There was something he needed to do, something he had felt calling to him for many moons now. Taking only a small pack of provisions and the bear claw pendant he always wore around his neck, fashioned from a claw Nura had shed years ago and given to him by his mother, he headed deep into the forest. He followed no visible path, yet moved with absolute certainty through the gathering dusk. Fireflies began to emerge, their gentle lights seeming to guide his way through the ancient trees. After walking for what seemed like hours, Lumo reached a clearing he had never visited before, yet somehow recognized deep in his soul, a place where the veil between memory and instinct grew thin. In the center of the clearing stood an enormous oak tree, so ancient its trunk would have required 10 men joining hands to encircle it. At its base, partially concealed by massive roots, was the entrance to what had once been a den. Lumo approached slowly, his heart pounding with an emotion he couldn't name, something between reverence and longing, between gratitude and grief. "I have come," he said simply, his voice carrying in the still evening air. "I don't know if you still walk these woods, or if you have long since joined the spirits of the ancient ones, but I needed to return to where my life was saved, to honor what you taught us all." Silence answered him. Not even the wind stirred the leaves overhead. Lumo knelt beside the abandoned den, running his fingers over claw marks etched into the roots, marks left by a mother bear many seasons ago. He closed his eyes, searching within himself for memories his conscious mind couldn't access but that his spirit had never forgotten. Images came to him then, flashes of russet fur catching sunlight, the rumbling vibration of a gentle growl felt through his entire tiny body, the sensation of being carried in powerful jaws with impossible tenderness, the warm, rough texture of a tongue cleaning his face. These weren't memories as adults understand them, but imprints left on his infant soul, sensations that had shaped him even without his awareness. As he knelt there, lost in this meditation of memory, a soft sound from the edge of the clearing made him open his eyes. Standing at the tree line, partially obscured by shadow, was an enormous bear. For a breathless moment, Lumo wondered if his mind was creating visions from his longing. Then the bear moved forward into a shaft of fading sunlight, and he saw that it was indeed real, an aged female with graying russet fur, moving with the deliberate gait of an elder who has seen many seasons come and go. Lumel remained perfectly still, not from fear, but from overwhelming emotion. The bear approached slowly, her dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that seemed to look through his adult form to recognize something essential beneath. When she was just a few paces away, she stopped, rising to her hind legs in the same gesture of acknowledgement his parents had described from that day 20 years before. "Nura," Lumil whispered, the name coming to his lips without conscious thought. He had heard it countless times in the retelling of his story, but speaking it now, in her presence, carried a weight of significance that made his voice tremble. The bear settled back to all fours and came closer still, close enough that Lumil could smell her wild scent, could see the gray around her muzzle and the wisdom in her ancient eyes. With infinite slowness, he raised one hand, palm outward, offering it to her as he might to a revered elder of his tribe. Nura sniffed his hand carefully, then pressed her nose against his palm. The contact sent a shiver of recognition through Lumil's entire being, not a memory in the usual sense, but a knowing that transcended rational thought. This was the being who had cradled him when he was helpless, who had fed him when he was hungry, who had taught his people that compassion could bridge the chasm between their worlds. Tears filled his eyes and spilled down his cheeks as he whispered, "Thank you for my life." The old bear made a soft chuffing sound that seemed to hold all the complexity of their shared history. Then, with deliberate movements, she lowered herself to the ground before him, her great head resting on massive paws. The posture communicated a trust so profound it took Lumil's breath away. This apex predator, making herself vulnerable before a human, a species that had once been her greatest enemy. Gathering his courage, Lumil slowly moved to sit beside her, his back resting against her warm flank, as if they were old friends reuniting after a long separation. Perhaps, in some way beyond human understanding, they were exactly that. As night fell completely around them, fireflies dancing like earthbound stars through the clearing, Lumil began to speak. He told Nura of the changes her act of compassion had brought to his people, how they now honored all creatures as kin rather than prey, how children were taught the story of the bear who saved their future chief, how ceremonies now included prayers of gratitude to the forest and its guardians. The bear listened with the deep patience of her kind, her breathing steady beneath Lumil's hand that rested on her fur. When he finally fell silent, something remarkable happened. From the shadows at the edge of the clearing, 3 half-grown bear cubs emerged cautiously, followed by a younger female bear, perhaps Nura's daughter or granddaughter. They approached with natural wariness, but no fear, having been raised in a forest where humans had become partners rather than threats. Lumil remained still as the bear family investigated him with cautious curiosity. One of the cubs, bolder than its siblings, came close enough to sniff at the bear claw pendant hanging around his neck. The young man carefully reached into his pack and withdrew the honey cakes he had brought as an offering. With reverent movements, he placed them on the ground before the cubs, who looked to Nura as if seeking permission. The old bear made a soft sound that seemed to grant approval, and the cubs eagerly accepted the sweet treats. As they ate, the younger adult female settled herself a respectful distance away, watching the interaction with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand its significance. "Your legacy continues," Lumil said softly to Nura, gesturing toward what he now understood to be her extended family, "as does mine." He touched the ceremonial markings on his chest that identified him as the future chief. "Tomorrow, I take my father's place as leader of our people. My first decree will establish the sacred grove, a place where both our kinds may come in peace, where the young of both our peoples will learn the true story of how understanding was born from an act of unexpected compassion. As if to seal this covenant between their bloodlines, Nura gently pressed her graying muzzle against Lumil's chest, directly over his heart. The gesture held such tenderness, such knowing, that Lumil could no longer contain his emotion. He wrapped his arms around the massive neck of the creature who had once been his second mother, burying his face in her fur as deep, racking sobs broke from his chest. All the years of wondering, of feeling different without understanding why, of hearing the story told and retold without having conscious memory of his own, all of it found release in this moment of reunion. And Nura, defying every natural instinct of her species, remained perfectly still in his embrace, allowing this expression of human emotion with the same acceptance she had shown the infant he had once been. When Lumil finally released her, wiping tears from his face with the back of his hand, the old bear rose to her feet with effort that spoke of her advanced years. She turned toward her family, gathering them with gentle nudges, preparing to return to whatever hidden place they called home. Before leaving, however, she performed one final, extraordinary act. Moving to a patch of soft earth at the edge of the clearing, Nura used her massive paw to draw a deliberate line in the soil. Then, with precision that defied explanation, she drew a second line that intersected the first, forming a simple cross. Next to it, she pressed her paw into the earth, leaving a perfect print, a mark no hunter could mistake. Lumil watched in wonder, understanding dawning in his eyes. With trembling hands, he knelt beside her mark and pressed his own palm into the soft soil, leaving his handprint next to her paw print. Side by side, the two impressions spoke a truth more powerful than any human language could express, different in form, equal in meaning, connected in purpose. "I understand," he whispered. "We are separate yet one. Different paths, same forest. Your children and mine, walking alongside each other for all the generations to come." Nura regarded him one last time, her ancient eyes holding wisdom no human could fully comprehend. Then, with her family gathered around her, she turned and moved back into the forest that was her home. At the edge of the trees, she paused, looking back at Lumil as if to fix his image in her memory. The young man raised his hand in farewell, tears flowing freely down his face once more. "I will never forget," he promised, "and I will teach my children, and they will teach theirs until the end of time." As Nura finally disappeared into the shadows, a sense of completion settled over Lumil. The circle that had begun with his rescue as an infant had closed with this reunion as a man. Tomorrow he would take his place as chief, carrying within him the lessons of both worlds. The human wisdom passed down through his father, and the wild knowing gifted to him by his bear mother. When he returned to the village hours later, moving through the darkness with the same confidence with which Nura navigated the forest, he found his parents waiting for him. One look at his face told them where he had been, what he had experienced. No words were needed as Alara embraced her son, feeling the lingering wild scent of bear on his clothing. Chief Aldrich placed a hand on Lumil's shoulder, his eyes reflecting understanding of the journey his son had needed to make. "She found you," Alara said simply. Not a question, but a recognition. Lumil nodded, unable to speak past the knot of emotion in his throat. His father squeezed his shoulder in silent support. "Then you are truly ready to lead," the chief said after a moment. "For you have been blessed twice, once by the wisdom of your people, and once by the heart of the forest itself." The following day, as Lumil knelt before the sacred fire to receive the mantle of leadership from his father, something unprecedented occurred. Just as Chief Aldrich raised the ceremonial headdress to place it upon his son's bowed head, A hush fell over the gathered tribe. At the edge of the village clearing, partially hidden by the undergrowth but unmistakable to all who had eyes to see, stood a massive bear with russet fur now touched with gray. Gasps of wonder rose from the crowd as they recognized Nura, come to witness this most sacred of human ceremonies. The elders murmured among themselves, for no wild creature had ever appeared at a chief's naming in all the generations of their people. Yet no one reached for a weapon, no one cried out in alarm. Instead, a profound silence descended, pregnant with meaning beyond words. Chief Aldrich, seeing where all eyes had turned, slowly lowered the headdress and turned to face the bear who had saved his son's life 2 decades before. With ceremonial dignity, he raised his arms in the traditional gesture of blessing, acknowledging Nura's presence and right to witness this moment. Lumel remained kneeling, tears streaming down his face as he beheld his 2 worlds coming together in a way he had never dared to hope. Without rising, he extended one hand toward Nura in silent invitation, his heart so full it felt it might burst from his chest. The bear did not approach further, respecting the boundary between her world and the human village. But she rose briefly to her hind legs, her gesture visible to all the gathered tribe, before settling back to all 4s. Then, with deliberate movements that spoke volumes to those with wisdom to understand, she inclined her great head in a gesture unmistakably like a bow, acknowledging Lumel as chief, not just of the human tribe, but as a leader whose authority she too recognized and respected. A collective sound of wonder rose from hundreds of throats as the people witnessed this unprecedented communion between species. Many fell to their knees in spontaneous reverence. Others wept openly at the beauty and significance of what they were seeing. Children pointed in excitement, their voices hushed by their parents who understood they were witnessing something sacred that would be told and retold for generations. Chief Aldrich, moved beyond words, resumed the ceremony with tears in his eyes. As he placed the headdress on his son's bowed head, his voice rang out with new meaning. Rise, Chief Lumel, bridge between worlds, whose compassion shall guide our people, and whose wisdom comes from both village and forest. As Lumel rose to his feet, now officially the leader of his people, Nura turned and disappeared back into the trees, her role in this human ceremony complete, her blessing bestowed, her connection to the new chief acknowledged before all his tribe. That night, as celebration fires burned bright and the village rejoiced in their new leader, Lumel stood alone for a moment at the edge of the clearing, looking out into the darkened forest. He touched the bear claw pendant at his throat, a physical reminder of the bond that had shaped his destiny. "Thank you, Mother of the Forest," he whispered, the words carried away on the night breeze. "Your lessons will not be forgotten." Far away, perhaps too distant for any human to hear, but present in Lumel's heart nonetheless, came the answering call of a bear, a deep, rumbling acknowledgement that seemed to say what words could not. That love transcends boundaries, that compassion knows no species, and that sometimes what begins in seeming tragedy can blossom into a connection so profound it changes the course of history. And so the legend was complete. The lost human baby of Chief Marshal, adopted by a mother bear, returned to his people not just alive, but forever changed, forever connected to 2 worlds. The story would be told around council fires for countless generations, bringing tears to the eyes of all who heard it, reminding humans and animals alike that in the deepest heart of compassion, we find our truest selves reflected in the most unexpected "oh."